billion empire built on lies, manipulation, and fear. $15 billion in stolen crypto. Thousands of enslaved workers trapped in compounds behind barbed wire. And at the heart of it all, secret ties reaching deep into China's most powerful state institutions. This is not a movie. This is real. As the world's attention drifts toward new trade wars and economic collapses, a scandal is unfolding that could expose the dark, hidden machinery behind China's rise and its collapse. Because while Beijing's economy unravels and property giants crumble into dust, investigators have stumbled upon something far worse. A vast scam empire that may have operated with the quiet blessing of Chinese officials themselves. The truth behind it all is now breaking into the open, and it could change the global balance of power. The drama began not in Beijing or Shanghai, but in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. There, U.S. and Chinese officials are preparing for high-stakes trade talks, negotiations that could define the next phase of the global economic struggle between Washington and Beijing. Tension fills the air. The United States, still recovering from inflationary pressures and political division, is once again preparing to strike. Reports suggest Washington is ready to impose another wave of export restrictions, this time not just on semiconductors, but on software that powers everything from laptops to jet engines. It's a familiar move, threaten before negotiating, a tactic that often sends markets spinning and Beijing scrambling. But within hours, everything changed. From the White House, a sudden burst of optimism. President Trump announced that a comprehensive deal could soon be made with China, a deal that might cover everything from agriculture to nuclear de-escalation. It sounded like a diplomatic miracle in the making, but behind the scenes, U.S. officials were skeptical. Was this optimism genuine, or just another bluff before the next round of economic warfare? Meanwhile, Beijing was moving its own chess pieces. China's Ministry of Commerce launched a detailed investigation into American chip manufacturers, demanding data on suppliers, customers, and logistics. It wasn't just bureaucracy, it was a warning shot. Then came the real blow. Chinese exports of rare earth magnets, critical components used in everything from electric vehicles to fighter jets, suddenly plunged nearly 30% to the United States. For decades, rare earths have been China's secret weapon, a resource the West cannot easily replace. And by tightening its grip on these exports, Beijing reminded Washington of its deep economic dependency. Analysts warned that this was more than trade posturing. It was economic warfare. Yet, as the U.S. prepares its own countermeasures, experts note that both nations remain bound together by trade. Despite the hostility, nearly $1 billion worth of goods still cross the Pacific every single day. Trade, ironically, remains both nations' strongest weapon and their greatest vulnerability. But just as Washington and Beijing circle each other with sanctions and threats, a darker storm brews inside China, one that money, propaganda, or diplomacy cannot contain. Foreign investors, once seduced by the Chinese dream, are now fleeing in panic. The skyscrapers that once symbolized endless growth are becoming empty tombs of broken promises. For global investors, China was supposed to be a once-in-a-generation opportunity, a bet on unstoppable urban growth. Over the past 15 years, they poured nearly $140 billion into office towers, malls, warehouses, and data centers. From Shanghai's gleaming skyline to Shenzhen's tech parks, the future looked bright. But the illusion is shattering. Vacancy rates in major Chinese cities have soared to between 20% and 40%, some of the highest in the world. The glittering towers are now silent. No tenants, no buyers, no future. A report by Oxford Economics predicts that office rents will keep falling until at least 2026, and that by 2030, the value of Chinese commercial properties could be lower than it was in 2020. An entire decade lost. The exodus has already begun. Investment giants like BlackRock and Carlyle are selling assets at massive losses. Carlyle's 31-story tower in Shanghai, once valued at hundreds of millions, sold for just 57% of its 2015 price. BlackRock defaulted on loans and abandoned 2 major office blocks, wiping out its equity. Even global banks like HSBC and Standard Chartered are feeling the shock. Their exposure to commercial real estate loans has become a ticking time bomb. And it's not just offices collapsing. Warehouses, retail centers, even luxury developments are bleeding money. Rents have fallen by up to 25% in some regions as landlords desperately try to fill space. Distressed sales hit $16 billion across 2023 and 2024, a record-breaking 22% of total property transactions. Analysts describe the market as a slow-motion implosion, one that mirrors the fall of China's great property developers like Evergrande. But this is more than an economic downturn. It's a reckoning, a realization that the so-called China miracle may have been built on the same foundation as its latest scandal: deception, coercion, and corruption on an unimaginable scale. And that brings us to perhaps the most explosive revelation yet: a criminal empire that may have operated with direct protection from Beijing's own security agencies. It began with an indictment. Last week, the U.S. Department of Justice unsealed charges against Chen Zhe, also known as Vincent, the chairman of Cambodia's Prince Group. At first glance, Prince Group looked like a legitimate real estate and investment conglomerate. It owned resorts, buildings, and financial firms across Southeast Asia. But behind the luxurious facade, investigators discovered something chilling. According to court documents and blockchain analysis firm TRM Labs, the Prince Group had evolved into one of the largest transnational criminal organizations in the world. Its empire spanned countries and industries, hiding behind glossy brochures and shell companies. But its true business was fraud. Thousands of trafficked workers were imprisoned inside fortified compounds in Cambodia, forced to work under brutal conditions in what became known as pig butchering scams. These were not small online cons. They were massive, organized financial traps designed to steal billions from unsuspecting victims, including many inside China itself. In total, the Prince Group is accused of laundering and stealing over $15 billion in cryptocurrency, now seized by U.S. authorities, the largest forfeiture in American history. But the most shocking detail wasn't the money, it was the protection. Investigators uncovered evidence that the group's leaders were coordinating directly with officials from China's Ministry of Public Security and Ministry of State Security. That's right, the very institutions responsible for law enforcement and intelligence in China. Documents revealed a web of corruption. Chinese and Cambodian officials allegedly warned Prince Group executives ahead of raids, offered them immunity in exchange for bribes, and even provided diplomatic passports so they could travel freely as the U.S. investigated. Investigators found ledgers documenting systematic payments to senior officials, risk control departments managing corrupt relationships, and luxury gifts, from yachts to expensive watches listed as operational expenses. When bribery didn't work, violence did. Messages recovered from the group's internal communications show orders for beatings, with only one instruction: don't kill them. The level of political protection was extraordinary. It blurred the line between organized crime and statecraft. The scam empire had become a state-protected business model, and now that protection is unraveling. The US and the UK have coordinated a sweeping response, seizing assets, imposing sanctions, and targeting the financial networks that sustained the Prince Group's empire. For Washington, this is more than just a criminal case. It's a warning to Beijing. If China's state organs are found to have aided criminal networks, the fallout could reshape global law enforcement cooperation or destroy it entirely. With $15 billion in seized Bitcoin, the U.S. now controls what was once a shadow fortune for corrupt officials and syndicate leaders. China, meanwhile, has reportedly demanded that Washington share the recovered funds to compensate victims inside its borders, a request the U.S. is unlikely to honor. Why? Because those same victims were defrauded by a network allegedly protected by Chinese state security itself. It's a diplomatic paradox, one that may harden U.S.-China relations even further. And it all unfolds as China's economy teeters on the edge. The property market is imploding, the tech industry faces Western restrictions, and foreign confidence has evaporated. This isn't just a crisis of money, it's a crisis of credibility. So here's the question haunting global markets. If China's vast wealth machine was built on layers of deception, from inflated property values to state-protected fraud, what happens when the truth can no longer be contained? The world is now watching as three stories collide: the trade war, the property crash, and the scam empire. Each one reveals a different face of China's unfolding crisis. At the top level, Beijing is trying to project power through trade negotiations and resource control. But beneath the surface, investors are fleeing, real estate is collapsing, and corruption seeps through every layer of the system. The Prince Group scandal is not an isolated crime. It's a symbol of how fragile China's financial and political architecture has become. As U.S. prosecutors tighten the net and sanctions expand, China's leaders find themselves cornered, struggling to defend an image of control that is slipping away with every revelation. The China dream that once promised unstoppable prosperity is now being exposed as something very different, a system built on manipulation, fear, and silence. And as more secrets are dragged into the light, one truth becomes clear. The empire of scams, lies, and corruption is finally collapsing under its own weight. The question now isn't if China can recover, but whether the world will ever trust it again.